and welcome to revision lesson number 3. My name's Mrs. Wingham and you're listening to Geography Rocks. Today's lesson is on UK weather hazards. I couldn't start a PowerPoint or a film clip without addressing the recent floods in Yorkshire in 2020. So on the news we've been watching places such as Calderdale in the heart of Yorkshire as they've suffered with the floods that the winter has brought. Many of you will remember Storm Dennis. You will remember seeing images of buildings that have been flooded, businesses that have closed, people who've lost their houses or had to go into evacuation centres. Either recall from your own mind about Storm Dennis, or perhaps try pausing here and taking a look on YouTube for some other information about Storm Dennis that can help supplement your knowledge. On the right, I've got a yellow strip which says what key terms can we add to make it geographical. Try to think about steady rainfall, overland flow, less interception, urban areas. All this language will make you sound like a real geographer. In today's PowerPoint, we're thinking about the UK's hazards. We might be asked a question about whether or not there are more significant hazards to the weather in the UK. And it would be good then if you could remember some key dates. I've tried to think of ways that I can remember the years that things happened. So in 2003 there was a heat wave, and I've used a 3 in the word heat wave to remind myself it's 2003. There were severe floods in 2009, and again I've tried to make the 9 into the D. And I was running out of inspiration towards the end here, but in 2010 there was significant snow over the UK, and I've tried to use the belly of the snowman to formulate the zeros, so 2010, 2010. Don't forget as well, 2020, the Yorkshire floods.
So we might be asked a question such as, what are the impacts of extreme weather in the UK? First of all, can you remember the dates of the weather events from the previous slides? Try to remember those little diagrams. So, we had a heat wave in 2003, we had floods in 2009, we had snow in 2010, and in 2020 we've had the storms, Storm Ciara and Storm Dennis. Let's take a look at how we could answer this question. Whenever I see a question asking about impacts, your first thought is to think about all the negative things that happen, but actually a heat wave and snow can bring fantastic opportunities for families and children, etc. So let's try to break it down into the date and the weather event, and then positive impacts and negative impacts. When I'm planning an answer to a big question like this, I almost see the table in my mind. So in 2003, there was a heat wave. What were the positive impacts? On the economy, tourism in the UK, people having staycations, people staying at home, people visiting the beach, buying ice creams, having a beer in the pub after work, all had an economic impact. Environmentally, people's gardens might have blossomed earlier, crops might have grown better, salad crops, plants, flowers. However, there would have been negative impacts. Some of those economic impacts might be that less money was spent on abroad holidays. Social impacts, people not being well in the heat, people having heat stroke, elderly people struggling to get out in the heat of the day. In addition, environmental impacts, crops may have scorched. It may have been more expensive to water crops, having both an economic and an environmental impact. Floods. Floods don't bring many positive impacts. However, there might have been an improved sense of community. In addition, some local tradesmen would have had more work for the foreseeable future. However, no tradesman is going to say that they're delighted when a disaster happens because they get additional work, so be careful how you phrase that. There would be many negative impacts. Economically, shops and businesses would have had to close, staff would have had to be laid off. Homes would have been ruined, social impacts, children wouldn't have been able to go to school and would have lost out on education, families would have been concerned about the future, they might have been put in temporary accommodation, elderly people may have been stranded from loved ones who could have supported them had they been able to get to them. The environmental impacts, crops would have been ruined, water might have been polluted, and sewage, etc., might have been spread onto land, causing environmental impacts. The snow in 2010 created lots of social positive impacts. Children having time off school for a few days, families spending time outside sledging and having snowball fights. There are always positives with these sorts of situations. However, the negative impacts often outweigh them. Economically, again, businesses would have had to close. Environmental impacts, crops that were planted might have become damaged, or planting of crops might have been delayed. The storms in Yorkshire that you've recently seen on the television have had many, many negative impacts, economically, socially and environmentally. So try to see a grid like this, but also do bear in mind that when we see the word impacts, they don't all have to be negative. Let's move on.
Take a look at the image. The question in the exam paper said, suggest how extreme weather in the UK can have economic and social impacts. Always take time to read the question clearly. So we're only thinking about the UK, we're only thinking about economic and social impacts, impacts which affected money or people. We are not considering the environment in this question. Let's shift our attention now to the photograph. So I can see a motorway, I can see it icy, I can see delivery trucks which are going to find it difficult to get to wherever they're going. So distribution of goods is going to be difficult. And I can only imagine that there may be vehicle breakdowns or accidents. Economic impacts from that picture alone suggest that goods won't be able to get from place A to place B. And equally, social impact are that it could cause accidents that could have an impact on a wider community. Underneath of the image, they talk about it being an amber warning where roads and railways are closed. There's a risk to life and a risk to power supplies. Try to think about the economic impact of road and rail closures. So if the railway closes, people can't get to work. Business slows down. Let's take a look here at what we know about the Somerset floods. So the Somerset floods, I've put over in the right hand side a picture to remind you that it is the rivers Parrett and the rivers Tone, but they're not necessarily spelt in that way. So we might be asked first of all to describe the location of the Somerset levels. Never forget to use the little maps that might be provided in the top left hand side here, which shows its location in the United Kingdom. So we can see that Somerset is located in the southwest of the United Kingdom. We can talk about the landscape. We can talk about it being low-lying land with many tributaries and rivers flowing through. We can also talk about the Quantocks and the Mendips on either side, which are steep areas of land. That's going to mean that any water is going to flow down into that flatter land quite quickly. Let's take a look at the Somerset floods. Let's try to think about social, economic and environmental impacts. Pause the video here and take a look at some other YouTube clips on the Somerset floods to see if you can complete the table. My name's Mrs. Wingham and you've been listening to Geography Rocks.